Good morning and welcome to the Wake Up Call. On Tuesday, we published a piece about the experts and political scientists and historians who say,
Did you know America has never canceled an election?
Since 1845, federal elections have happened on the Tuesday after the first Monday in November, without interruption, through every war, every crisis, every attempt to destabilize this country, not once canceled, not once successfully stolen at the structural level.
that's only true if you don't count Black people. If you wake up on Tuesday, November 3rd, and there are no polls open, that's only one way to cancel an election. The definition of cancel is to decide not to conduct or perform something planned or expected, or to destroy the force, effectiveness, or validity of something, or to bring to nothingness or destroy. And that has definitely happened a few times in American history. And today we're going to give you some examples of when that has actually happened. The first example is Ben Tillman in South Carolina. He was basically a henchman for Wade Hampton III, this former slave owner Confederate general who became governor by force. He murdered a bunch of people, most notably in the Hamburg massacre, which happened during the election of 1876, which we'll get to later. But Ben Tillman was basically his henchman, and in 1876, he went on this mass murder campaign throughout the state of South Carolina, and it essentially worked. South Carolina had two governors, Wade Hampton III and Henry Chamberlain. And Chamberlain resigned, even though subsequent studies of that election determined that Chamberlain actually won, and Wade Hampton became the governor because he had an army of henchmen. Tillman, as the leader of that army and as the leader of the Hamburg massacre, eventually became governor. By the time Tillman became governor, there was only one party in South Carolina, the Democratic Party. So all the white people voted Democrat. So how did Tillman cancel an election? Remember, we talked about this before. Primaries are essentially private events. So the Democratic Party created a rule that says for a Black person to vote in the Democratic primary, they had to have 10 white men vouch for them. Remember, South Carolina was majority Black. It was 60% Black, 39% white. So essentially, Black people in a majority Black state couldn't choose the candidate for governor. Ben Tillman won, and the first thing he did, again, in a majority Black state, was get the legislature to pass a law that said that there were no mayors, there were no county commissioners, there were no county or municipal officers. They were all appointed by the governor. Now, again, he didn't necessarily shut down the polls. What he did was destroy the force or effectiveness of the electoral process. He brought it to nothing. He essentially canceled all the previous elections in a majority Black state. The next canceled election was in Arkansas. Again, because there weren't really two parties, there was just the Democratic Party in many of the southern states, including Arkansas. So in Arkansas, they didn't even call this an election. They called it the Brooks-Baxter War. It was an actual civil war. Both of the candidates were Democrats. There was Joseph Brooks, who was supported by the Black people of Arkansas, and then there was Elisha Baxter, who was supported by the white Democrats. So in 1872, they went head-to-head in the gubernatorial election, and Baxter, because he was the incumbent governor, he controlled the state electoral machinery. He went to the Black places and actually closed down the polls. And the other thing he did is set up fake polling places in the places where Black people live. And so because there was this disputed election, both of them claimed victory. And both of them got these armed militias. Brooks had an all-Black militia, and Baxter had an all-white militia. And the president had to make a decision. So he sent these three judges down to Arkansas, and Baxter's people hijacked a train, kidnapped the judges. So Baxter became the governor, even though they canceled that election for all of those Black people in Arkansas. The next one was another election that we've talked about before. So in Georgia, during Reconstruction, Georgia elected 33 Black lawmakers to the state legislature. White supremacists came from all around the South to essentially oust these 33, the original 33 Black lawmakers in Georgia. out of office. It resulted in a Supreme Court case, White versus Clement. The argument was that Black people could vote, but the Constitution didn't say that Black people couldn't hold office. White versus Clement eventually decided it, but by then they had killed a quarter of the original 33 and reinstalled white supremacy, or quote unquote redeemed the state. They canceled that election. And I'm sure you've heard about the Wilmington insurrection, the Wilmington race massacre, or the Wilmington coup of 1898, when white farmers and Black people formed this fusion party to elect local representatives, and it was overthrown. Most people, when they talk about it, they talk about the violence. They don't talk about the fact that these white supremacists formed a militia that blocked the roads to the polls on election